Sanjeev Gupta says a new backer for the Whyalla Steelworks owned by his GFG alliance is close, asserting multiple offers of finance are within reach. It's a message he's been selling for weeks after his main financial backer Greensill collapsed. But those exposed to the Greensill collapse want their money back and they're coming for Mr Gupta's assets. Citigroup has filed court action on behalf of Credit Suisse to force the insolvency of two of GFG's companies, One Steel Manufacturing, which runs the Whyalla Steelworks in South Australia, and Tamor Coal in New South Wales. It's part of a global push by Credit Suisse to claw back $13 billion in funds that bankrolled Lex Greensill. Greensill packaged up the debts of its clients into bonds and sold those to Credit Suisse clients. So Credit Suisse is targeting Mr Gupta's company. Its action, GFG says it will defend vigorously. The CEO of CreditorWatch, Patrick Coghlan, joined me. Patrick Coghlan, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me today.
Can you run us through what Credit Suisse is trying to achieve here with this court case?
Look, ultimately they're using the winding up to put pressure on, in this case, GFG, to pay their bills. It's a common tactic.
How common is it, though, when you go after the third party rather than the company that you actually lost the money from?
Very uncommon. In this case, it's a very technical procedure or process that they're going through, and ultimately they're hoping to put pressure on, but it's ultimately up to the court to decide how that's going to proceed.
So in this regard, given it is so unusual, what do you think the outcomes could be?
Look, there's so many moving pieces here. You've got global companies, you've got so many different corporate structures. The fact that you've got a third party involved makes it really difficult. We don't know what's going to happen with Greensill yet. And with such large numbers at stake, you can be sure that the lawyers will be involved and it'll drag out potentially for years, I would imagine.
What happens to the workers while a court case like this is going on?
Look, it should really be business as usual. However, they will have this dark cloud hanging over them and a question mark going, what are they going to end up doing? Will they have a job, when this all comes to an end? Is someone else going to come in and buy us? Are they going to continue to invest? It would certainly be quite concerning for them.
Could a court force the business to wind up operations that are making money?
Look, I think anything's possible in this sort of scenario. One of the questions that is probably going to be posed is, will they get more money if they support GFG and see them continue to operate and ultimately come to some sort of payment arrangement, or do they wait for them to come up with a refinancing plan? That's the really difficult bit. So I think at the moment cards are pretty close to both sides' chests, and it's going to see who blinks first.
When it comes to this scenario, can you take us through the players? There's Credit Suisse, there's Greensill, and there's Sanjeev Gupta's operation.
One of those things where you'd love to have a little how-to video put together to actually explain it, because there's plenty of parties involved and it's very technical. So the way I understand it at this point is that GFG and Sanjeev Gupta's group of companies need financing. Greensill were essentially packaging up existing invoices and future invoices as well, selling them to Credit Suisse, who was packaging them as bonds essentially and selling them to investors. So what we have now is a case where Greensill has collapsed, money is ultimately still owed for that financing, and you've got Credit Suisse ultimately trying to access the funds direct to GFG.
How much of an onus is on Credit Suisse here? It bought those bonds in the first place. Should its risk procedures have been more robust?
Look, they've been in the press for a few things lately, and this is just one of them. And I think from a risk perspective, they'd certainly be having a really, really deep, hard look at themselves and their processes. It's certainly a tough one. The onus is on them ultimately to assess the risk and understand, are they going to get paid? But also it would be interesting to see if they discover that the disclosure from Greensill or from GFG wasn't what it should have been as well.
Obviously, this is nothing like the global financial crisis, but do you see some similarities between the bonds that Greensill was selling and the collateralised debt obligations we saw during that period?
Yeah, definitely. I think from a high-level perspective, there might be some bankers out there that sort of roll their eyes, but I think in layman's terms, yes, you're seeing bonds that are being packaged and sold as those AAA sort of ratings that we saw back in the GFC, and ultimately turning out not to be that. I'm not sure that they're necessarily junk status, which is what they turned out to be back then, but with such a concentration risk to one large player in GFG, they certainly weren't as low risk as many people probably thought.
Sanjeev Gupta has said that he's very close to refinancing his operations. How would that affect this court case?
It's a good question. Look, I would imagine that if a refinancing does take place, Credit Suisse is ultimately going to get its money, in a really simple terms. But I'm not a technical person when it comes to that. But yeah, that's what I would suggest would happen.
Well, as you say, there's so many pieces to this story, and it's early days yet, and we'll have to see how this court case plays out. But Patrick Coghlan, we appreciate you coming in to discuss it with us.
Thanks for having me today.